Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organizations. Each and every episode, we sit down with experts from various fields from around the world, just like you're grabbing a coffee with them, to dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So go grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you succeed at work without losing your family, your health, or your soul? Wow. Well, we just jumped into the deep end. And this is an incredibly important question, and that's the one we're going to dive in today with Mitchell Osmond. He's an executive coach, founder of Dad Nation, and a leader who's lived both sides of the high performance coin. So today's episode of the Speak with People podcast, we're going to dive deep into what it takes to thrive, really, in all of those areas of life. And I love his story. He's going to tell you more about it, but just how he kept fighting, climbed out, rebuilt his marriage, and now coaches leaders to do the same. I got to tell you, I've been following Mitchell online. I've been so encouraged, downloaded their freebie from their website filled with incredible questions. And so I know this is going to be raw, inspiring, and packed with the tools to help you lead stronger, thrive, communicate better, and reconnect. Mitchell, thank you. Welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be here, my friend. I am so looking forward to our conversation, and thank you for that beautiful lead-in. I'm just happy to be here, man.
I love it. I love it. So we talked maybe off camera. You're in Calgary, and so, but I don't. Man, this is probably a tough place to start, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this. But I don't really sense like the thick Canadian accent. You know, I grew up in Detroit, across the border, and I had friends that said about, and all of that.
You know what? It's because I'm a podcaster and I'm a coach, and 90% of the guests that I communicate with, 90% of my clients are based out of the States. And so I talk to Americans all day. And at the end of the day, we're just parrots, man. So that's why I sound like I get Canadians coming up to me and they're like, "What part of the States you from? I noticed that drawl." I'm like, I've actually, no, I'm from the same city as you, man. Yeah, it's funny.
I love it. I love it. Well, hey, before we hop into the questions, we get the conversation going. Tell us a bit more about you. Give us a little bit peek into your story, who you are, what you do, what's got you to this place.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. And I'll try and keep it as short as possible. But one thing that does resonate with people is a bit of my transformation story. And really for me, I get that question a lot of what was your turning point? What was that transformation moment for you? And for me, it was really two pivotal moments. One was a fight, and one was a funeral. So let me unpack it. If you can picture, the fight was the first one. Me and my wife were sitting on the couch in our living room, and it all hit the fan. We were about 3 years into marriage, and we got into a fight about money, which morphed into a fight about me being a workaholic, and then something else and something else. And your listeners probably, if they're married, exactly what I'm talking about. It just went from one recurring point of tension to the next. But this, for us, this fight, this day was our rock bottom, because there was something about this one that was different. We had the conversation where we dropped the divorce word, and it was like, I felt like this for the first time I had heard that word, and we had always promised not to use it. And I knew that if something didn't change, this would all be over. And to give you some more context, leading up to this point, I had recently been let go from a senior leadership position. And man, my career was my calling. It was my identity. It was everything, especially as men. We base a lot into this. I spiraled into depression. I gained 60 pounds. We were $100,000 in debt. I was medicating with drugs and alcohol, just trying to keep my head on straight. I was checked out, burned out, stressed out, as they say. And I just I could not understand, because I had seen so much success professionally in growing organizations and leadership. But why was it that I couldn't figure out my life personally? How was it that I was so powerful at work, but I come home and I was powerless? Maybe some of your listeners can connect with that feeling. But really, at the end of the day, to even bring it back, a step further, I had come from a very dysfunctional upbringing. I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, drugs, crime were littered throughout my family, and I was caught in the middle of it all. So I knew where I came from, Jason, and I knew that I wanted something different from my life, but I could feel myself continuing to get pulled back into the trauma of my childhood and repeating the same mistakes as my father made in my family. And when I would yell at my wife, like, I could hear him in my own words,
Mm.
and I hated it, but I couldn't stop it, and I knew I was called to more, but I didn't know what that looked like. And at times it felt like I was two different people trapped in the same body. I would go to work and I would lead meetings and lead, boardrooms, but when I came home, I didn't even know how to talk to my own wife. And I was experiencing this duality that was kind of tearing me apart on the inside. And so the second defining moment in my story came a week after this giant fight. And I was invited to sing at the funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man. And there was about 2,000 people in the room. And, the minister, as he was wrapping up the funeral, he had asked the congregation a question and he said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And Jason, when I was packing up, or strapping on my guitar and getting ready to sing, I could barely choke out the lyrics to the last song because all I could think about was if I walked out of this church and got hit by a bus and this were my funeral, no one would be saying, "I want the marriage that he had. I want to imitate his life." No one would be saying, "I want the bank account he had or the body that he had." They would probably say at that point, "He struggled and then it was over and it was sad." And that's the thing, when we share stories at funerals because that's all that we have left,
Mm.
to talk about that person. And by the time I packed up my guitar on that, after that funeral, I was determined that I would rewrite my own story, not just for me, but for my family and my wife and my son. And I committed to writing that new story. And it sounds intense, but I decided that day that I would have to die to the man that I used to be in order to become the husband and father that I knew I needed to be for my family. And so practically, I mean, I knew that if I wanted to get different results, I would have to stop making the same decisions, right? That's Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting something different. And so I surrounded myself with men who were living where I wanted to go. These men, like my ceiling was their floor. You understand what I mean? And they
Mhm.
surrounded me and they encouraged me and they showed me what was possible. They held me to the standard that I said I wanted for myself. And Jason, within 18 months or a year and a half, we paid off over 100 grand of debt. We completely restored our marriage. I lost the 60 pounds, built a lean, confident body, and I was clean of substances and distractions, and I was calm, confident, and content for the first time. And so that was the transformation. And then, because I was in positions like public positions, everyone started asking questions like, "Mitch, what are you doing, man? You're on fire." And so I started helping friends of mine, just buddies who were having a hard time in their marriage or losing the weight or struggling with challenges in work. And then one of my friends challenged me. He said, "If you really want to have impact, if you really want to live a life worthy of imitation, you should start a podcast and start helping the world, teaching them the principles." So I started the Dad Nation podcast. And that was about 2 years ago. And then within 6 months, I had listeners all across North America. And then they started reaching out and asking me, "Hey, do you sell anything? Could you coach me? Could you help me?" So I said, "Sure, I'll figure it out." I mean, at this point, I've helped so many people get out of debt and restore their marriages for free. So why not? And
Mhm.
that was, about a year ago. And I've, grown the Dad Nation podcast to be a top 10% rated global podcast, and then a six-figure coaching practice, all fairly quickly. But I'm just passionate about the fact that you are the most qualified to help the person you used to be. And that's my story, man. And so, I'm not high on any sort of platform or, on any kind of moral horse. I'm just really good at telling guys what not to do because I've made all of those mistakes. You know what I mean? And so that's a bit of my story, man, and how I got here.
Wow. My goodness. Just incredible. It's so amazing. For many years I was a public speaker in schools, and so I did assemblies. So stood before elementary kids and middle school kids, and You really high school kids, you really want to feel good about yourself as an adult, stand in front of 800 middle schoolers because they'll tell you quickly, exactly what they think. But it's amazing now. Most of my time is spent in rooms with corporate leaders and business leaders. But I stand in front of these rooms and I see the same 13-year-old. It's absolutely incredible. Some of these business leaders, they walk into the room, their shoulders are slumped. They can't look anybody in the eye because you could just sense the shame and the guilt and, whatever's holding them back. And I'm just so grateful that there are incredible leaders like you out there who are, helping people find that there's a different side of them. You said something though that really struck me hard. Earlier you talked about hearing your father,
Mm.
as you were doing that kind of stuff. I mean, so incredibly painful. Wondered if, where through the course of all of this that you transformation you've done, where is it your dad relationship now, or where was it then? Just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're okay now. And it took, I think it took some time. I mean, I had to do some deep, healing work. I was angry because I felt like a lot of my childhood had been stolen from
Mm.
me. There were a lot of memories that I did not have. That most of my buddies had that were great memories. Father son hockey games. All those different things that I just didn't have, and so I was bitter until I someone challenged me, with the fact that, well, his dad was an alcoholic too. He actually didn't know how to be a dad, and that wasn't modeled for him. Now, does that give him an excuse? No, but I would say that it makes it harder, coming from a situation like that. And that, did he take ownership? No, probably not. Later on in life, yes, but at that time, I needed to understand that his position, that he was trying in the way that he knew how, but he didn't have the tools, he didn't have the resources. He was dealing with his own demons as well, which we could get into, the generational cycles and masculinity and why we struggle so much to connect emotionally and all that. But, learning to extend grace and to also not continue to give him power, because as long as I was holding bitterness, I was giving him power over my emotions, and that's true for anyone where we choose unforgiveness. And it's that
Mm.
quote. It's like unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting it to kill someone else. It's like, no, no, you are the only person who's getting affected by this unforgiveness. And so for me, I had to take that power back, and I said, I will no longer let you or anyone else, for that matter, have that emotional power over me, and heal from it for myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely does. Let's jump to the bottom of the pit,
Mm.
because we've all been there. We've had moments, and maybe let's speak to our listeners who are there now, and they're going, "You don't understand. It's too deep. There's no way up. I can't stop eating, or I can't stop drinking, or I can't stop, looking at my device, all every second of the day because it's the only thing that can keep my mind, off of anything." You know, talking about that funeral was a huge part of your story. How do you help that leader, or maybe some words of encouragement to them, about trying the ascend, out of that pit?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most important thing to do is to understand that you are in control,
Mm.
right? Um, no one is going to take the remote from you. My wife isn't going to come take the cheeseburger out of my mouth. You know what I mean? There's never going to be a cheerleader, a pack of cheerleaders in the gym cheering you on at 5 a.m. when you drive up into the parking lot. So we wait for the perfect time. We wait to feel motivated. We wait till when it's going to be easy. And maybe it's not inspirational, and maybe it sucks to say this, but it's not going to be convenient, and it's not going to be easy. But we're living in a world where we expect things to be easy, but everything is difficult, right? And I love
Mm.
this quote, like, choose your pain. And really, there's a poem that was written about it, and I'll share a little bit of it just from what I can remember. But it basically says, having a great marriage is hard. Having a bad marriage is hard, right? Having a lot of money is hard. Being broke is hard. Having a lot of great friends can be hard. Having no friends is hard. Being in shape is hard. Being overweight is hard. You know what I mean? Chasing after your dream is hard. Building someone else's dream is also hard. And it goes on to pull out literally every single perspective that you can have in life. And at the end of the day, there is no real thing as the easy road. And so, number one, we have to get real and honest about that and understand that life is just going to throw challenges. And that's actually part of the process of growing, right? You don't lose weight, you don't build muscle without tearing it first.
Yep.
You don't get a great marriage without going through adversity. You don't get clean from drugs without going through withdrawal. You know what I mean? There is that season. So number one is understanding, let's not wait for it to be easy. Because as long as we tell ourselves, well, we're going to wait till the sun comes up and then we're going to try it, you're never going to do it. Number two is if you want to find a motivation to do something, you must connect with your why. Okay. And I
Hmm.
tell people all the time, your why power is so much stronger than your willpower. Your willpower will fade, but your why power, when you're doing something that's connected with your why, then that is going to be something that lasts the test of time. So, what do? We begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey in his book, The 10 Habits or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill, one of the most famous thought leaders of our time, said all the time, begin with the end in mind. My funeral moment, are you living a life worthy of imitation, was me beginning with the end in mind. And so what I do with my clients is the first thing we do is I get them to write a eulogy
Hmm.
from the perspective of their wife, right? Or the perspective of their kids. What would they say about you today if you were to die? And then you're going to write a second version of what do you want them to say at your funeral. And then we're going to actually you're going to read that to me, you're going to read it to your wife, and you're going to make a declaration of the man that you said you want to become. Because once you're faced with your mortality, and once you're faced with the reality, with the end in mind, then we can get a real clear picture of who we want to be. And so we must understand where we're going into the future. Because I could say all day, well, I want a six pack, or I want to have a better marriage, or I want to, whatever. But that's too ambiguous and it's too short term. Like it's like, why do you want to get into shape? Well, because I want to look good with my shirt off. Okay, but here's another reason that might be deeper, that might be more connected to our why. For example, I want to be strong enough and healthy enough to walk my daughter down the aisle one day. I want to be able to throw my grandkids in the air and play with them and play catch with them. I mean, that kind of stuff is deep and it's visceral. It's long term. So we're beginning with the end in mind, right? So that's one thing I would encourage your listeners with today is like, what do you want to be known for? And so many people don't think about that. And let's bring it even shorter term. I'll often ask my clients, what do you want? And I'll tell you, Jason, 90% of them don't even know because they spent their whole life building their business or building their career or whatever. And I'm like, or serving someone else's vision. And when they do write down exactly it is they want, I help them understand that their current actions are actually sabotaging the very things that they do want when they do get clarity. Does
Right.
that make sense? So I would say honesty and beginning with the end in mind are two really great starting points.
Wow. Just incredible. As you were talking about that, I was thinking through, why do you think it's somewhat sometimes so much easier for us to excel in work and not excel at home? Why do we approach our professional career and we put time into it and energy and we show, and then at home we expect the same results, but we don't put any of the same effort and energy. Where do you where do you think the disconnect there is?
That is such a good question, and I love that you asked it because it's so important to understand this, Jason. So, here's the thing, and again, I predominantly, like I said, work with men, but I also talk to a lot of women, about this, and on a lot of podcasts that speak to women as well. But at the end of the day, especially for men, is it's very, very easy to quantify your success at work, right? How do I know I'm doing a good job? Well, I get a bonus, I get a promotion, become partner, whatever. The revenue is up this quarter. I closed this many clients. It's tactical. It's very strategic. And it's easy to measure. It's very tangible. When I go home, how do you measure that you've made progress in your emotional awareness? How do you measure being a better dad? I mean, your 6-year-old's not going to come up to you and be like, "Hey, Dad, here are 10 strategic reasons why you're excelling as a father." You know what I mean? It's not going to happen, right? And so it's so hard to quantify that, and especially as men, because again, the masculine essence is driven by accomplishments, is driven by purpose, is driven by excellence. And so we want to know that we're doing great. And we know we're doing well by immediate rewards. And so when we come home, it's really hard. The lines are so blurry. And so what do we do? Because we don't have the metrics, we start treating our family like our employees. We start leading our family meetings or our date nights like board meetings because that's what we know. And we can't turn off that switch. And then what happens is our family starts feeling disconnected because they feel like dad became the boss or dad became the CEO of the family. You know what I mean? And so that is huge. Understanding that there is a switch that needs to be flipped. I talk to guys all the time. Like I literally had a conversation with a client last week, and he said, "Man, I don't understand. I come home and my wife is complaining about this thing, and she gets so frustrated. And I tell her what she needs to do to fix it, and I tell her the strategy, and I let him talk, and I talk, and he talks. And I said, "Listen, man, I hear you, but I said, how many men do you lead at work?" And he's like, "Well, I got a crew of about 80 guys." So okay, 80 guys. You've got your wife at home. I said, "How many of those 80 men are you sleeping with?" And he was like, none. I was like, "Okay. So if you're not sleeping with these people, then that must mean you have a very different relationship with these men than you do with your wife at home, right?" He's like, "Well, yeah." So I'm like, "Well, why are you treating your wife with the same rules and the same strategies you're treating these guys with?
Wow.
The same rules do not apply. Stop treating your family like they're your employees. Different tactics." You know
Yep.
what I mean? Does that make
Yep.
sense? So in a long story or a long way, that's some things that I would say make it difficult for us to really lead at home like we do at work.
Wow. Absolutely. Going back to the funeral analogy, past life, I officiated a lot of funerals. So
Mm.
stood up in front, officiated, and I can't even count the times that adult children of the deceased, mainly dad, and I'm asking for stories, and I'm asking for moments, and I'm asking them, "Hey, would you want to get up and tell a story and speak?" And the amount of times that I heard, not because of fear, not because of they were overwhelmed by grief, but heard things like, "Why would I say anything good about him?" I mean, it just took my breath away every single time. And so maybe speak to dads, about how important their communication is. Modeling it when they're talking with their spouse in front of their kids, how important their communication is to their kids, and then, teaching their kids how to communicate. Because I don't know if we understand how much is being absorbed by our kids, how we interact with our spouse, how we, communicate to them. I think sometimes we're just like, I'm just because I hear it from leaders all the time, and I've been there. It's just talking. It's just words. Well,
Mhm.
it's pretty powerful, and you're registering something that could be, lodged there for the rest of their life. So, would love your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a great question. I think maybe I'm going to write a couple things down here because I tend to think faster than I can speak. So I want to make sure I get it. I get it all down. But there's a big thing we need to understand is that before we start talking about how to teach our kids as men, we must first understand that it's very normal for us to struggle with even emotional awareness and
Mm,
emotional leadership, because in order to teach our children, we must first know we need to model that first, right? And I'll talk about that in a moment. But if you're listening to this and you're feeling like I don't even know how to label my own emotions, let alone teach my kids how to do that, let me tell you, you are normal,
Mm.
and it's understandable. There's a psychological term devoted to this called normative male alexithymia. You can Google that. It's a mouthful. But this is a term that psychologists have used to explain the fact that generally, in general, men struggle with being able to connect with their emotions. And part of the word alexithymia, it means to arrest. It means that you stop, you actually clam up, like you don't even have the words to articulate why you feel the way you feel or what you feel. And so when you think about it, we're not that many generations removed from World War II, for example, where these men experienced incredible amounts of PTSD and trauma. And they didn't have, a psychologist on speed dial. What they had was the bottle. They had maybe, silence, suppression, they had whatever. And you know what? Thank the Lord for these men and the sacrifice and the service that they made. But at the same time, they didn't have those tools and resources. And so what did they do? They said, well, they stuffed it down, right? Real men don't cry. Deal with it. Suck it up, right? And they turned to, like I said, alcohol and other different things. And so those men raised another generation of men, again, because we model what we know. And those men didn't have those tools. They weren't taught that. And then, so now here we are, just a couple generations away from extreme trauma and PTSD and with no real tools and resources. Now, fortunately
Wow.
today, we've got developed systems, but let's not be oblivious to our history and understand why we're in the position we're in. Okay, number one. Number two, when it comes to why this is important, is because our children may not always do what we say, but they will always do what we do. All right. So if you're hearing me today, I want you to know that you are the blueprint. You are the blueprint, right? So your son will grow up to be, and we know this statistically to be true. The vast majority of us will grow up to repeat the patterns and behaviors of our fathers. And if you have a daughter, she will grow up to crave the attention of a man just like you. And so if you want your daughter to bring home a great man one day, you need to model that greatness for her so she can recognize it in other men when she sees it. That's the best way, and there's no getting around it. I mean, this is not just theory, these are statistics.
Yep.
I read somewhere that there's an 86% chance that our children will adopt the same behaviors and attitudes as we do. So I'm like, hey, what are you teaching your kids about what you're eating? What are you teaching your kids about how to love your wife and cherish your wife?
Yep.
Not by what you say, but what you do when the
Yep.
doors are closed. So I would say understand that it's normal to struggle with it. So that's not necessarily an excuse. There are resources out there, like of course myself and many others. But to understand, if not for you, for your family to dig in and to teach them. And when it comes to practically, because it can feel overwhelming, I would say the best place to start is just honesty and vulnerability. Being like, hey,
Mm.
if you lose your cool or if you get frustrated, getting down to their level and saying, hey, dad messed up. I don't I don't have it all figured out. You might think I do, but sometimes I lose my cool. Or talking with your wife even and saying, having the humility to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, you know? And so vulnerability, honesty, and openness, I think is key for that. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Humbly saying, I'm sorry. Ooh, powerful, powerful moment. And to be able to say, hey, I was wrong and I'm going to do better. Just killer. Uh, Many of us struggle. I don't know what the percentage is. But Vanessa Van Edwards calls them gremlins, kind of in your head, your inner
Mhm.
critic, that voice, it's amazing how loud, I think about that great scene from Back to the Future when he turns up the amp. I'm really aging myself here, but turns up the amp, and it's like some days that it's like that volume goes way up through the roof and way down. One, what do you think is the attributing factor for why sometimes that inner critic, those gremlins, that voice, it just sounds so incredibly loud? And then two, how do we get to the place where we have more control over the dial and we're just turning those voices down?
Man, you ask such great questions. You must be a podcaster. Oh, I'd love to camp out here for the next 3 hours.
Right?
You are so right. And this is a big part of it, right? And this is a lot of the deep work that we talk about. Is like understanding that your past. There is the voice of intuition. Some people might call that, people of faith might call that the voice of God. Some others might just call it intuition, the universe, whatever. And then there's your inner voice. Okay. Your intuition is usually quite quiet, and your inner voice is very, very loud. And that inner voice is the voice that says, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You missed your moment. You're getting too old, whatever. And so this narrative comes from, could be anything, man. It could be a high school bully. It could be a parent. It could be a colleague. It could be, you name it. It could be times you failed. It could be coming from your own broken promises. You know what I mean? And so what happens is these stories play on repeat in your head, and it's a tape that just goes on, and you have to learn to silence that voice and listen to the intuition, right? So if you don't mind, I actually have a framework around this exact thing that I'd love to share with your
Love it.
listeners. So part of this, part of the framework, the overarching framework is called the author's advantage. And in short, I'll say real quick, but most people think that your past, leads into your present, and then your present determines what you do in your present determines your future. But in reality, really what that means is your past determines your future, because if you have a sort of victim mindset of like, well, this is just, what happens to me. This is my lot in life, because of this is what happened. You live a lot of your life on autopilot, and we know 95% of our decisions every single day are subconscious. Only 5% are conscious decisions. So that's why we wake up every single day, and sometimes wake up a year later and don't even know what happened to the time. It's because the vast majority of our lives have been lived on autopilot. And so, what I want to encourage you with today is that you can flip the script. And so, through the author's advantage, you can take the pen back and rewrite your story. And the way we do it is we turn the model on its head, and we say, actually, let's start with the future and go to past or present and then past. So, what that means is, right in the beginning of this conversation, I said, begin with the end in mind. You design a very clear picture of where you want to go, who you want to be, the marriage you want to have, the career you want to have. Get very, very clear. And then you take that future vision that you start with, and then you reverse the engineer that into daily strategies and action steps in your present to that will lead you to that. And then the third step is actually to speak to your past and actually bring it in alignment with where you're moving, because
Mm.
we all have things, that lies that we've been told. Okay. And this part, the past, is the hardest part, because here's the thing: you can't change what happened to you, but you can change what it means, right? You there is. So for example, let me give you an example. I'm talking about my upbringing. I told you, people told me my whole life, you're going to be an alcoholic just like your dad.
Oof.
You're not the smart one. You're not going to get a degree. I would have never dreamed that I was going to help anybody. And so I could have chosen that past. I could have just really held on to that past and limit me. And it did. I fought that for 5 years, Jason, before I took the step to launch the podcast and the coaching practice. It took me 5 years
Wow.
to really unpack those lies. And so what did I do? Instead of saying, well, this is just who I was and this is just who I'm going to be, I said, no, no. In fact, I'm going to rewrite this and actually bring this into alignment with where I want to go. So maybe that this past actually serves a purpose. Maybe this can be fuel to this fire. Maybe I can use this to actually rewrite my own story, rewrite those lies that I believed, in order to give me the passion and the intensity and the tenacity to go for what I'm going to go for. And so what I'm going to teach your listeners today is there is a 5-step process to rewrite these lies that we believe. Because you were just talking about this narrative that goes on in the back of your head. These are subconscious lies that we believe, like we've been talking about this whole time. And it's just called the clear thinking process. All right. So clear stands for, it's just 5 different steps: CLEAR. Okay. So number one is C, and that stands for call out the lie. Okay, so I want you to ask yourself, what lie am I believing in the present because of something that happened in the past? What is it? Is it that I'm not smart enough? Is it that I've missed the moment? Is it that I'm just an angry dad? Is it that my wife doesn't love me? You name it, right? Number two is stands for it's L, and it's going to be locate the source. Now that you're understanding what that lie is you're believing, you're going to ask yourself, where did it come from? Get curious. Did it come from a bully in high school? Did it come from maybe, your father or your mother or whoever that might be? 85% of our core beliefs are formed by the age of 18.
Hmm.
So the vast majority of our belief system and our narrative is actually formed before we even finish high school. And so that's why it's so important to dig backwards, right? So locate the source. Number three is E, and that stands for evaluate the cost. This one is huge. What is this lie costing me? Is it costing me my marriage? Is it costing me my peace? Is it costing me respect of my children? Write it out, feel it, own it, right? And then the fourth step is A, right? Affirm the truth. Now you're going to say, what is true? What is a greater truth than that lie that I was believing? And maybe that's going to be like, you know what? If you're struggling with you thinking that um, maybe your wife doesn't love you or say something like that, you could question and be like, well, no, she tells me she loves me every night before she goes to bed. Or my kids say that I'm the best dad ever, so I can't be that bad, or whatever, right? And so you actually affirm the truth, and then that's really what we're doing. We're extracting the limiting belief from our subconscious mind. We're locating it, right? Discrediting it, and now we're replacing it with
Wow.
truth
Yeah.
and planting it. Then the last one is R, okay, and that's reinforce with action. So now what you're going to do is you're going to back up that written truth with actions, because belief without behavior is just wishful thinking.
Hmm.
And so now you're going to ask yourself, if my truth is that I honor my body, then how am I going to reinforce those words with my actions? What does it look like to work out 3 times this week? If my truth is I lead my family well, right? Then maybe you plan a family date night with no distractions. And that's how you start tactical actions that reinforce that belief in yourself. And so you do that with every lie that you believe, that clear framework. I tell you, man, over the course of 3 to 6 months, you will be a different human being. This is called neuroplasticity. This is how we rewire the way we think.
Yep.
So does that all make sense?
100%. That is incredibly powerful. And I know that's going to be, in for me, I'm going to go ahead and rewind that quite a few times on, on this podcast. And I know our listeners, it's going to be a great help for. That's incredible.
Well, can I tell you real quick, like how I did it, just for your listeners? Like I told you, I had done all this. I'd lost the weight. I'd paid off the debt, restored the marriage, all that, and then I had this gap where I was just living it and helping people for free. And then someone said, "Start a podcast." I said, "There's none of that. I'm not smart, right? I'm not smart. I'm just going to end up being an alcoholic." And my therapist was like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
You literally have people asking you to start a podcast. So I started writing content, Jason. I wrote over 400 pages
Hmm.
of frameworks and concepts and practices before I even had the courage to launch this. And what was I doing? I was I was making my actions align with this new belief, because I would say to myself, okay, that's a lie that I'm not smart because these people want me to help them. And I've actually helped all these friends. So what's the next step that I can take? What's an action I can take? Well, I can have the courage to launch a podcast. And then that started a feedback loop. And then I would have listeners tune in and say, hey, could you help? And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's another lie that I can reverse. Oh, well, maybe, you know what I mean? And so
Yep.
that's kind of how it works.
Wow. My goodness. This has been incredibly rich. I mean, you are so incredibly generous. I can't thank you enough as you've just opened up the vault of your wisdom and being able to share this. Before I let you go, we're building this online library for leaders to go to where they can get new ideas, fresh resources. Is there a speaker that you just you just highly recommend? Every time you hear them, they check the boxes. You just keep going back to their TED Talks or whatever it is.
Mm. I mean, there's two that come to my mind. I'm a big fan of Craig Rochelle. He's a huge leadership guy. And then Simon Sinek, especially if you're a leader and you're looking to serve others powerfully. The timeless leadership truths. Those two men are phenomenal leadership experts and phenomenal leaders themselves. So those are a couple names I throw out there.
Absolutely. We're not all podcast listeners, but if you are, is there a podcast, either guilty pleasure, you love your gardening podcast, or true crime, or a development one that you just keep going back to, you highly recommend?
Oh, that's a great question. Graham Cochran. It's called the Graham Cochran Show. He is a guy who runs multiple seven-figure businesses off of 5 hours a week each. So he runs four off like 20 hours a week, which is bonkers. But his systems and practices are insane, and he just gives it all away for free, and it's amazing. And I've been following him for a few years, and everything he teaches is just gold. So anytime I can get the time to listen to another podcast outside of editing my own or being a guest on someone else's show, I'll tune into that one. So
He's also a fellow Tampa person, and
he is.
he's been on my list to try to get on the podcast. So that's a good reminder of how. Yeah, he's spectacular. And then lastly, is there a book that you're just like, boy, every leader, you've got to read this at some point?
It's funny. It's right here. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And this is what I'm reading right now, and it's incredibly challenging. It really challenges the leader's paradigm on the paradox of rushing and hurrying, and actually what it does to your mind and your productivity and your family and your children, and how to really implement rhythms of rest in your life, which is so critical. So especially for people who are kind of chronic to overworking, like myself.
Incredible. Where can we send our listeners? Where's the best place for them to find out what you do, how to connect online, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, man. Thanks for asking. First of all, before I share that, I'd love to give your listeners a free gift if you're okay with that.
Of course.
I just got a free a PDF that they can download called the Connection Code, which is 50 questions to spark the fun and get the fire back in your relationship. And these questions are specifically designed. We talked a lot about men and their emotions, and our partners need to be connected with emotionally. And this is powerful tool that all of my clients use. And so whether you're going out on a date night or you put the kids down, pour up a glass of wine and just take 2 or 3 questions off this list, and they're designed to help you connect with your spouse on a deep level, and you'll really enjoy that. I'll give you the link. You can put it in the show notes, but if you just go to dadnationcode.com/code, you can download it for free. But with that, you can check out my podcast or the podcast. Yeah, it's just Dad Nation Code, or the Dad Nation podcast is a big one. And then you can just check out the website as well. This is Dad Nation Co. If you just Google Dad Nation, you'll see me kicking around. My Instagram recently just got hacked, and so that's been suspended and shut down, which is super frustrating.
Oh,
So if you try and find my podcast, you won't find it right now until I win this war with Meta. But for now, you can hit up the YouTube channel, which you can find all of my content, all my teaching, practical stuff is up there. Tons of great stuff, you guys. And I'm just a huge believer in giving it away for free. So any way I can add value to you guys, I'm all in for it.
wow. Wow. We will post all of this in the Facebook group. We'll put it in show notes. Mitchell, I can't thank you enough. This has been phenomenal. I can't wait to dive in. I did want to say I did download the code earlier, and I love it. I'm a lover of questions, and there are some questions on there that I thought, ooh, okay, I gotta employ those. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for having me. And I'll leave your listeners with this quote that's been resonating with me. And it's just that time is the only currency we spend without knowing the remaining balance. And so
Mm.
I'm aware that we don't know how much time we have left. And so when we give someone 60 minutes of our time or 30 minutes, that's a huge deal. And so to you, Jason, and to your listeners, thank you so much for giving me that time. It is such a precious asset. And so I appreciate you all. And thank you for having me on the show, Jason. Loved being here.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Speak with People podcast. It means the world to us when you share this episode. Thanks for liking, subscribing, or following the podcast. That really does help the podcast get into more ears and into more leaders listening. Also, don't forget, we have 2 exciting resources for you. The first is go to Facebook and join the Speakers Group. This is a community designed for leaders who want to grow their communication skills. Also, go to speakwithpeople.com/skills library to access the Communication Skills Library. It is an online resource chock filled with resources that will inspire you and transform you and grow your communication skills. Thanks again for being a part of the listening community. We cannot wait for the next episode.